everyone, it's Daria. Welcome back to my channel full of lit, and today I'm going to be telling you all about the books that I read in the months of August and September. Now, I have decided to combine 2 months because I felt like I would be remiss if I did not talk about the books that I read in August, because pretty much all of them had to do with my video, Hogwarts House Picks My TBR. I wanted to update you guys on whether or not I enjoyed any of those books that I chose, and let you all know whether that video idea was a success or not. The first book that I finished in the month of August was The Complete Purse Police by Marjane Satrapi. I gave this graphic novel 5 out of 5 stars. This book is an autobiography and it follows the author as she lives and grows up in Iran. You see her as she grows up from childhood to adolescence during the time of the Islamic Revolution in the country. And it really is this perfect blend of personal history and national history. So Purse Police comes in 2 parts. The first one chronicles her entire childhood in Iran, and the second part chronicles her college years living and studying in Europe. And I think the first part is really so much more interesting because it's very much focused on the Islamic Revolution. You're not really moving around to different countries. You're with a set group of characters, her family, and it's nice to really dig in and get to know those people. The second half that focuses on her years traveling through Europe as a young woman, while they are very enlightening and there are moments where you see her struggling, being on her own, being away from her family, she's constantly meeting new people, and a lot of these people are really shitty. And I found myself skimming through a lot of the interactions that she was having because they weren't genuine and these characters weren't sticking around for more than like 5 pages. There are so many similarities between her experiences during the Islamic Revolution and what I have heard from my parents and from my aunts and uncles. I think if you ever want to read a story to learn more about Iran and the Islamic Revolution and just what life was like for regular everyday people, I think this is definitely a book that you should check out. Now, the next few books that I'm going to mention were all part of my picks from my Hogwarts House Picks My TBR video. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will link that video in the description below. It's pretty self-explanatory. I let booktubers choose the books that I read based on their Hufflepuff book recommendations, read those books, ended up loving a majority of them. The first one that I read was Salt to the Sea by Ruta Shepetis. I listened to the audiobook of this and I absolutely adored it. Not only the narration, but also the book and content itself. I ended up giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, Salt to the Sea is about a very horrible maritime disaster that not many people know about that occurred during World War II. That is pretty much the basic premise that I understood going into this book. So I didn't realize that that significant maritime disaster actually occurs at the very end of this novel. Up until that point, we are switching POVs between multiple different characters, all of whom will end up on this ship. So first we have Joanna, who is a Lithuanian woman running away from the Soviet Russians. Then we have Florian, who is harboring this top secret information that he cannot let anybody know. At the start, did not like him at all, thought he was very rude. And then of course, by the end of the novel, I absolutely adored him. Then we have Amelia, who is a 15-year-old Polish girl, and pretty quickly, early on in the novel, you figure out that she is pregnant. And then we have Alfred, who is part of the Nazi army. And at the start, I very much thought that we were going to be encouraged to sympathize with him, and I was a little bit wary of that. But no, he is just absolutely delusional and ridiculous and a horrible, horrible person. I think there are times when authors try to do multiple POVs where you really can't tell who is speaking. All the voices blend together. There's no distinction. That is not the case with this book. A lot of the relationships that form between characters are based on friendship, protection, care, service, very familial type bonds. I think another thing the author did very well was her ability to portray tension and panic. I have to give props not only to the author, but also to the audiobook narrators. The way that they were able to convey emotion through their voices was just impeccable. The next book that I ended up reading from my Hogwarts House Picks My TBR list was Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I ended up giving Cinder only 3 out of 5 stars, and I have one major gripe with this book, and that is the fact that it feels so unfinished. There was no wrap-up, no closure. So many major questions surrounding the plot and the characters were left unanswered. I know that there are other books in this series, but they all follow different couples and different POVs from what I understand. So you're telling me that I have to hear about what happens to Cinder and all these important things that she's dealing with from another person's perspective. I just don't understand how the author was allowed to leave so many vital questions unanswered at the end of this book. Like, for example, will Cinder become the Lunar Queen now? Will her and Kai be together and form some kind of alliance? I don't understand how you can just leave your main romance hanging like that and not give me any kind of conclusion. Also, the secret, the big plot twist of the book was so incredibly obvious. Like, I knew pretty much a chapter into this book what the plot twist was going to be. If there is a long-lost princess in a YA fantasy book and there's a main character who miraculously doesn't doesn't know where she's from. Chances are that she's gonna end up being that princess. I feel like I should mention things that I enjoyed because I said it was a 3-star read and that means that you actually kind of enjoyed it. But the way that I'm speaking about it right now, I think it just makes it sound like I should give it 2 out of 5 stars. Actually, the world building was pretty good. I was very much intrigued by the idea of cyborgs and the history between the Lunars and the Earth, but that didn't really get a chance to be explored because, like I said before, the book just ends in the weirdest possible place, and I'm so frustrated. Like, how did editors look at this book and not think, maybe you should add on another like 50 to 100 pages and actually wrap up your plot? Next up, I read Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars and I love it. I had attempted to read this book before, and I'm gonna be honest, just like the first time, it was a little bit of a slow start. At the start, you're being introduced to the world, you're being introduced to the characters. It's all very expository. You're pretty much just waiting for Baz to show up. The world building was very well done. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it. The most interesting thing to me was just seeing the ways in which Rainbow Rowell took conventions from Harry Potter and just kind of flipped them or changed them to service her own story. I love that the spells were all based on turns of phrases in actual spoken language rather than all the random made up Latin. Wait, no, Latin is a real language, it's not made up. Simon Snow is a bisexual disaster and I love him for it. Like, Simon was really out here running around to everybody that he knows asking where Baz is, thinking that he's gonna show up at any minute. Baz never leaves his mind. And yet Simon has the audacity to be like, oh no, I don't like him, we're enemies. That's disgusting. Like, a major thing that I think Rainbow Rowell did very well with this book is that she made the mage, the Dumbledore equivalent character, exactly what he was supposed to be. It makes you realize, hey, you have this older mentor, this person that the main character sees not only as a person who would give them guidance, but pretty much as a father. And the mage slash Dumbledore is constantly putting the main character, this young child, in perilous danger. And not only that, the mage is revealed to be, spoiler alert, actively evil, the one who's been causing all of these horrible things to happen. And I thought that was very well done. People who are in positions of power, people who you think you can trust, are often the ones that end up hurting you the most. Another thing that I loved is the acknowledgement that the world of magic is not something that works for everybody. Agatha repeatedly talks about how she doesn't want to be part of the world of mages. She is not interested in magic. And I think that's very interesting because when you think back on Harry Potter, I mean, in that entire world, in that entire school, there must be some people who sit there and are like, you know what, I don't really care for this. I don't want to use a wand. I just want to go to school and like become an accountant or some shit. I also really appreciated that there was an acknowledgement of the trauma of these fantasy worlds. Imagine being like 15 years old and having to potentially save the entire world, having all these people depend on you, constantly having to thrust yourself into dangerous situations and almost being killed every other week. That is some tough shit to deal with, and I like that there was an acknowledgement of that. The next book that was suggested to me and that I ended up reading was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This book follows a bunch of goblins, ghouls, and ghosts that live in this graveyard and take in this young baby boy that has stumbled into the cemetery one night. You get to follow this boy named Nobody as he grows up and starts to explore the world outside of the graveyard. And then there's also the outside threat of the man who killed his actual family when he was young that he managed to escape, and that man wants to finish the job. Every chapter or so in this novel, you are introduced to a new creature, a new ghost that Nobody interacts with and learns from. And it's very interesting to see these people teach Bod something new, and then later on in the novel, it all kind of circles back and you see the ways in which every single relationship that he creates has influenced him. The found family trope is strong in this book, and I really enjoyed the fact that every single creature, ghost, what have you, was equally important in Bod's life and raised him as if he were their own. If you ever end up picking up this book, I highly recommend that you check out the full cast audio. It is absolutely incredible. Every single person is so talented. It feels like you're listening to a recording of a stage production. The next book that was recommended to me was actually a manga called Orange. I read the complete first volume and I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but I did have some major gripes with the way that mental health was represented and handled in this book. Orange follows a group of Japanese teenagers, and one day a new boy shows up at their school and they take him under their wing and introduce him into their group. The novel flips back and forth between past events that occurred in high school and the present, and the major change between those two timelines is the fact that the new boy and their friend Kakeru, I think is how you pronounce it, he ended up committing suicide. And the whole story starts when the main character, Naho, gets a letter from her future self telling her to do all that she can to stop this from happening. Let's talk first about the things that I enjoyed and the things that I thought this graphic novel did well. The friendships between the main characters are obviously the heart of the story, and if those don't work, the entire book falls apart. Luckily though, they were very well written and enjoyable. I enjoyed all the group's dynamics, everyone had something to contribute to the group, and I felt like nobody was really left out. It was a very quick read, very easy to get through. I enjoyed that. Now with that being said, let's talk about the things that I think could have been handled much better. There seemed to be this running idea throughout the novel that you could somehow save somebody from their mental illness through the power of friendship. Of course, we can do our best to reach out to our friends, to love them, to listen to them, to show them the most care possible. But to hold yourself responsible for another person's life in that way is very dangerous. This is a big spoiler in case you ever want to read this manga, please click away now. But you eventually find out that every single friend was sent a letter by their future self to save this guy. And so they all kind of team up together to try to get him to not commit suicide. And what baffles me is that nobody thought to maybe seek professional help. I think if they genuinely wanted to show care and love for their friend, they should have suggested that he go seek professional help. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the mental health rep in this novel was dubious at best. At the same time, some people may say that this book is not really trying to accurately represent mental health. It's just about friendship and about loving people and living in the moment and trying to show appreciation for people while they're still here. And while I understand that, I think if you're going to have the entire premise of your manga and your story revolve around a suicide and trying to stop that from happening, I think you probably, or at least I would hope that you would want to represent that accurately. The next suggested novel was a middle grade book, and I was very excited for this because I have not read a lot of middle grade. It was The Girl Who Drank the Moon. This novel is set in a world in which there is this witch. That was terrible, but I'm not gonna take that out. Every single year, the people in this village sacrifice the life of the youngest person in their town to this witch who they believe is evil. Little do they know, however, that the witch is actually not too bad. And in her perspective, she thinks that this town just gives away their babies and leaves them in the forest to starve and die. So in her mind, she is saving the baby, and she takes them and she gives them food or milk of some kind from the stars. Unfortunately, this time around, when she takes this young baby girl, she feeds the baby from the moon and not the stars. The baby becomes infused with very powerful magic, and that is where our story begins. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm going to be honest, I cannot remember much of what happened, but I do remember vaguely enjoying this book. Honestly, I don't know about you guys, but there are some books that it's like the second you finish that final page, it's like your entire memory gets wiped about every single damn thing that happened in that book. And then honestly, it just kind of makes you wonder, okay, if I don't remember anything that happened in this book, then did I actually enjoy it? Or was I just lying to myself and it wasn't that great? Like, should I demote this book to 3 out of 5 stars? But I do remember kind of enjoying it. Honestly, I don't know. If any of you have had this experience, please validate me and let me know. I will now read for you the very basic and very vague notes that I took when I read this book. Incredible world building. I guess I can't remember any of it. I liked the idea that corruption and evil typically lives within those in power, and evil is not some outside entity that wants to destroy us. Obviously, you find out that this witch is not an evil woman. The true evil exists within the town, within the people who are in charge, the people running the government. They are forcing people to give away their children, they are living these lavish, very wealthy lives while everyone else suffers, and they've created this myth that there is some kind of evil outside of the town that's trying to get us, when really, it's the people within the town that are doing the most harm. And those are all the notes that I took on this book, which I think that I liked. I honestly don't know. Let's move on. Next up, I went on a bit of a Jane Austen binge. I read Pride and Prejudice for like the 13th time, and then I read Persuasion and Emma for the first time ever. I can't tell you why I've read Pride and Prejudice so many times and yet have always refused to read anything else by Jane Austen. And I've seen adaptations of every single other Austen work, and there are some that I would consider favorites even though I've never read them, and Emma and Persuasion are two of those. I was very excited to read them and they did not disappoint. I gave both books 4 out of 5 stars, but I have to say that I enjoyed Persuasion a little bit more just because I think Anne Elliot is such an intriguing protagonist. She does not really stick up for herself. She's not outspoken. She's clever and she's intelligent, but she doesn't go out of her way to really speak her mind, make jokes, conversate with people. Her biggest flaw is that she is easily influenced by the people that she loves and by the people around her. Often at the expense of her own happiness, she will do whatever she can to please other people. That description does not really sound like the kind of person that you would consider an intriguing protagonist, and yet I love her. For those of you who don't know, Persuasion follows Anne Elliot, who a long time ago turned down a proposal from a sailor named Wentworth at the request of her family, who did not see him as a viable candidate for marriage. All these years later, her family is in debt. They have to rent out their home, and through circumstances, which I won't really get into because it's spoilery and also will take forever to explain, her and Captain Wentworth, they cross paths again and are thrust back into each other's lives. Like I said before, Anne is a very quiet kind of character. If she was a side character in any other novel, if we were not inside her head, it would be so easy to dismiss her as boring. Being inside of her head, you see how passionate she is, how much she truly feels. I don't read a lot of second chance romance. This is really the only one that I can think of that I've actually enjoyed. And it's very interesting to see Anne reflect on their past relationship and reflect on her regrets, and to see the ways in which Captain Wentworth very much is still in love with her, and because of that has a lot of resentment towards her and what she did. I think them getting back together is one of the most satisfying romantic conclusions in any book that I've read. Obviously, the point of any romance is for you to be invested in the couple and for you to want them to be together. But we all know that there are varying degrees to how much we are invested in a couple. There are some people that you just so desperately want them to be together that you can't stand it. Other couples that you're like, oh, good for them. And then other romances that you read and you're like, I genuinely don't care, and honestly, I hate both of you. And with Captain Wentworth and Anne, I felt like they deserved to be together. Like, they'd waited so long, they'd suffered through so much. Now, when it comes to Emma, she is so fun, and even when she is making so many mistakes, as she often does, she is nothing but entertaining. I think what is so intriguing about her is how she thinks that she is right all the time. Emma often doesn't think before she speaks. That gets her into a lot of trouble, particularly in this one moment where she is reprimanded for talking down to an older woman who has been in her life for so long and pretty much humiliating this woman in front of all of their friends. And what Emma says is mean and rude, and sometimes you just kind of want to be like, Emma, just sit there and don't get involved. And yet she constantly does, because that is her flaw. That is who she is. And it's really fascinating and really, I think, rewarding to see her finally realize that, hey, I don't have to meddle in everybody's affairs. I can just let the people that I love make decisions for themselves and support them in whatever they do. I don't have to be orchestrating everybody's lives. I think maybe where Emma falls a bit short in comparison to Persuasion and Pride and Prejudice for me is I'm just not as in love with the male hero. There were many times that I felt like her and Knightley had more of a brother and sister relationship, and that is kind of how they were brought up. So it was hard for me to read romantic tension when they were bickering with each other. I guess I'm just not a huge fan of childhood friends to lovers, and I just think, like I mentioned, there wasn't really a lot of romantic tension between them for the longest time, and then suddenly, randomly, Emma at the end is like, oh wait, I'm in love with Knightley and no one else can have him. That's why I'm so possessive over him and why I don't want my friend to date him, because I'm in love with him. And I was just kind of like, okay, like I get it, but like for the longest time, you guys were reading on the page like brother and sister having an argument, so I can't suddenly flip my switch and think of you as more than that. The next few books I'm going to be talking about were all read for my university classes. The first one was A Mercy by Toni Morrison. This book is set in the 1680s and it centers around the lives and relationships of these women and one man who live on this farm. You have Jacob, who is the master, Rebecca, who is the mistress. Then you have Florence, who is a young slave girl, Lena, who is a native woman, and Sarah, who is a white indentured servant. One unifying theme throughout this novel is all of these women considering what it means to be a family. Jacob thinks of him and all these women as a family, even though he purchases them, but he doesn't see it that way. He sees it as him rescuing these women. Lena considers herself to be Florence's mother, and she is incredibly possessive of Florence. Florence is obsessively in love with the blacksmith, who is a free black man who comes onto the farm from time to time and works with Jacob. And Lena tries to break them apart constantly and keep Florence for herself. And then we have Sorrow. Lena keeps her separate from everybody else. Nobody really talks to Sorrow or interacts with her, and so Sorrow has created this figment of her imagination called Twin, who is her only companion. Then we have Rebecca, who was sold to Jacob by her father to come over here and marry Jacob and work on the farm with him. Jacob was constantly talking about all of them being a family. You could see relationships being formed. Rebecca and Lena became very close companions. Lena thinks of Florence as her daughter. And yet, when Jacob dies, this makeshift family crumbles, and you see that there is nothing really connecting these people. Next, I read Cain by Jean Toomer. I read this for my Harlem Renaissance class. This book is not really a novel. It is a collection of poems and many short stories that Jean Toomer wrote. And so many of the short stories were centered around women. Many of them talked about sexuality and relationships. There were also stories discussing what it meant to be biracial. I definitely enjoyed the short stories more than the poetry. I do prefer prose. On the whole though, I did enjoy this book and I gave it 3 to 5 stars. So next, I read The Tempest by William Shakespeare, and then immediately after that read A Tempest by Ami Cesare, I believe you pronounce it that way. I'm glad that the syllabus was set up for us to read these books back to back, because if you didn't know, A Tempest is a reimagining of William Shakespeare's original work, but Caliban is portrayed in A Tempest as a rebel, a revolutionary, someone who is standing up against the oppression of Prospero. In The Tempest, Caliban is pretty much the butt of the joke all the time. He is someone who we are not meant to sympathize with, and so it was interesting to see the way in which he is being reclaimed as this revolutionary symbol in A Tempest. The final book I'm going to be talking about is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This book is set in an alternative timeline in which the 2016 election was won by a Texas representative who is a woman and a divorcee. This book is set in the perspective of her biracial son Alex. The plot of the novel really kicks off when Alex is at the royal wedding, and some hijinks ensue that gets him into major hot water with the media. And because of this media fiasco, Alex and his supposed arch nemesis Prince Henry, the second son of England, have to come together and fake a friendship for the sake of the media and their reputations. Now, of course, because this is a new adult romance, it doesn't stop there. Enemies to lovers has been redefined. I feel like I don't even need to explain my feelings about this book. Like, if you've read it, you get it. I have not had such a visceral, physical reaction to a book in so long. There were times that I was reading the book and I would stop and realize that I had curled in on myself because it was just so damn cute. I think beyond just Alex and Henry and how amazing they were, the politics in this novel was like a breath of fresh air. I cried so many times, especially at the end of this novel. Like, I really would never have guessed the fictional scenario of Texas going blue would make me so emotional, and yet that is exactly what happened. So that's it for me today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, subscribe, comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, or just let me know what you read this month. As always, my social media links are in the description below, so check those out if you would like, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Thank you.